Juan, it's been a monumental day in Egypt. I mean, a real cataclysm there as President Mubarak steps down. There are parties in the street, but the military looks like it's in control for the moment. What happens now?
Well, I think that's the big question. In a historic day, a day where we saw a street revolution take down a 30-year leader, an autocrat in Egypt, Mubarak is gone. But I think the real question and the real friction actually starts now. The question of what happens now that the military is in control, and are they going to lead a process that leads to an open, democratic, pluralistic Egyptian state? Or do we see something else? Do we see something where the political powers that be, the folks who are still there and present, folks like Vice President Suleiman, try to co-opt the process in some way and don't allow the kind of opening that the protesters have called for? The other side of the equation is, are the protesters satiated? They've met their initial principal demand that Mubarak step down. But in essence, that's not all that they're protesting for. They're protesting for political openness, economic opportunity, social change, really. And so the departure of Mubarak is an important and historic step and a symbolic one, but it doesn't solve some of these underlying issues. And so how the military takes the reins here and how they run the process toward a more open, democratic, pluralistic system is really the complicating factor and the big question now.
There are multiple problems here, though. You have a military institution, obviously connected to the old regime, and now we're trusting the military to run a democratic reform process?
You've hit the nail on the head. I think a lot of observers have cautioned in giving too much credit to the military. I mean, this is a military that has been behind the regime for 3 decades, and I think it's still up in the air as to where the military is going to take things. I think the public pressure and the international pressure is clear that we're going to see a system and a process that leads to open democratic elections, one that is open even to the Muslim Brotherhood and even to groups that have been outlawed in the past, giving voice to the street protesters. But I'm not sure that the military has necessarily made that final calculus yet. And so no doubt the Obama administration, others around the world are going to try to influence how the military, the Egyptian military, is thinking about these issues and will help guide them along so that they actually lead to an election either soon, within 60 days, or in the fall that leads to something that looks like what the protesters want. But I think we've got to be cautious here because the military is now in control. Some could call this a military coup d'etat on the shoulders of the street protests. Are they going to take the voice of the protesters as they move this along, or are they going to be the classic military that we've seen over the last 3 decades? The jury's still out.
It brings us to our first flashpoint of the day, and that is in what now is essentially a vacuum. We don't know what's going to come out the other end of the pipeline. What risk is there that the government of Egypt could fall into the hands of some kind of radical group or be influenced greatly by some kind of radical group?
Well, I think a major debate now is in the context of this power vacuum with Mubarak gone, how do the extreme elements in Egyptian society, which there are, everything from the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, which forms a core part of Al-Qaeda, to more moderate elements of the Islamist Party, Muslim Brotherhood, which has been outlawed. What role do they play? Do they try to take full advantage of this current environment? For example, does Al-Qaeda try to send operatives in? Do they try to take some of the people who've escaped from prison and begin to operate in North Africa more aggressively? Does the Muslim Brotherhood veil its ultimate goals of an Islamist state in Egypt and try to gain power slowly but surely through whatever process emerges? These are critical questions. One of the interesting things is you started to see the Muslim Brotherhood go on a PR offensive. Yesterday in the United States, there was an op-ed in the New York Times and an op-ed in the Washington Post from the Muslim Brotherhood leadership trying to influence the elite's opinion in the United States, trying to say we're not a threat, we're part of the process, and in fact, we're not even going to put a presidential candidate up. But I think the jury's still out as to what the Muslim Brotherhood wants, in part because the Muslim Brotherhood may not know itself.
There's even a debate among our leaders here in this country, our intelligence leaders, about whether or not the Muslim Brotherhood was a violent organization. We heard yesterday The DNI clappers say no, not in Egypt. But the FBI Director Mueller said, well, they do violent things or stand for violent things overseas. So we don't really know who these guys are.
No, this is the difficulty with the Muslim Brotherhood. It tends to be a shadowy organization, well organized since the late 1920s, based in Egypt, but with a global network. Their Palestinian franchise, in essence, is Hamas, the violent extremist terrorist group, as so labeled by the U.S. and the European Union. And so it has various branches around the world, various networks that operate globally. Its political form in Egypt has been nonviolent in name for a number of years, and they've disavowed the use of violence, which is good. But there's a question of who's actually running the Muslim Brotherhood. Is it the more extreme Islamist elements that really want an Islamist Egyptian state, that don't want peace with Israel, that want Sharia as the basis of Egyptian law? Or the more moderate folks, like the leader we heard in the Washington Post editorial yesterday, who's a younger leader, more reform-minded, more modernist, wants to have the Muslim Brotherhood be a part of the Egyptian society. So I think the confusion you hear from American officials' voices is actually a confusion and a reflection of the complexity of the Muslim Brotherhood, both globally and then within Egypt.
It's going to be very, very interesting to watch how all of that plays out.